We are on page 108 in our math book. We are going to analyze the tables of values and the graphs shown below. So we have fish inches and gallons. What that is talking about is how long like a fish is in a fish tank, and then how many gallons of water should there be for that fish. So we actually have this graphed two different ways. The first way is where the independent variable is the gallons and the dependent is talking about the length of the fish in inches. And then we have the second graph over here where it's flipped. So now we're going to say that the independent variable is the fish length in inches and the dependent one is the number of gallons. So we're going to talk about two different ways that you can read a graph. So number one here. What does the point 0, 0 mean on each graph? So remember, that is the origin. It's where it crosses our x and y at 0. Well, if we look at our graph, this first one, if we have 0 gallons, it means that we have no fish. So that means that we would have a length of 0. So if there are 0 gallons of water, there are no fish. Same thing if we look at this one with 0, 0. If we have no fish, if we're at 0 fish, that means we have no water. So it means the same for both. Now we're going to determine the meaning of each point. So what does the point 6, 9 on the fish inches per gallon graph represent? So that means we are talking about this first one, the fish inches per gallon. So that means the x is talking about the gallons, and then the 9 is talking about the inches, because that was the y value. So that means if there are 6 gallons of water, the fish is 9 inches. Well, now let's take a look. What does 9, 6 on the gallons per fish inch graph represent? So now we're looking at this second one here. So the x value was talking about the fish in inches, so that was the 9. And then the 6 was the y value, which is talking about the gallons. So on this one here, we would say if there are 9 inches for the fish, then there are 6 gallons of water. So when you're reading graphs, you have to make sure you pay attention to what is your independent and your dependent variables so that you interpret it correctly. Okay, let's keep going. So what does the point 1, 1.5 on the fish inches per gallon graph represent? So we are looking back over here at this first graph. So I can see that 1 would be right here on my graph. Here is 1.5. Remember, whenever we talk about how much for one of something, we're talking about the unit rate. So this represents the unit rate. So this represents the unit rate. And so remember the 1, that is talking about the gallons, since that's the x value. The 1.5 is talking about the inches. So this represents the unit rate, that for every 1 gallon, the fish is 1.5 inches. Now, if we think about the point 1, 2/3, so this is the gallons per fish inch graph. So now we are looking at the second one. So 1, and then we have 2/3 right there. This is now our unit rate for the other direction. So this is talking about inches, and this one's talking about gallons, since we're looking at that second graph. So this also represents the unit rate because we have how much for 1. So this represents the unit rate that for every 1 inch of fish, there is 2/3 gallons of water. And so when we're talking about using the graph to determine the unit rate, what we're looking for is when the x value is equal to 1, we look to see what y equals. So where x is 1, whatever the y value is, that is the unit rate. So visually, when we looked on our graph, right here was 1 for the x value. You go up to the y value, well, it was 1.5, and so that was the unit rate. We went over here to this one, x is 1, and that unit rate was 2/3. Okay, we are going to use one of our graphs to determine each answer. So how many inches of fish can fit into 10 gallons of water? To do this, let's write an equation. So let's start with one of our points. So let's use 3/2. And you can choose any of them because remember this is a proportional relationship since it passes through the origin and creates a straight line. So I'm going to use this first one, so I'm going to do 3/2. So I have 3, and that was talking about inches over 2 gallons. And I'm going to set this equal to, well, I'm going to write an equation, so I'm going to use the variables I for inches, and then I'm going to use G for gallons. So over here, I'm going to write that as I over G. And now I'm going to solve for I in this case because I want to know how many inches. So I'm going to cross multiply. So we have 3G equals 2I. Solving for I divides both sides by 2. So my equation is 3/2G equals I. And now I'm going to plug in 10 for G. So I have 3/2 times, and then now this is 10. That is going to give me how many inches? So I'm going to put 10/1. So then we get 30/2 when we multiply across, which equals 15. So that means we could have 15 inches of fish. That is one way with writing your equation. You could have also plugged in 10 for G as well, cross multiplied, and you would get the same thing. So let's do that for the second case. So how many gallons would you need for 7.5 inches of fish? So same ratio, 3 inches over 2 gallons. This time it gave me 7.5 inches, so I'm going to put that in my numerator. And then I am trying to solve for the number of gallons, so that is G. I am going to cross multiply, so I have 3 times G, and then equals 2 times 7.5. I'm going to change 7.5 to an improper fraction. So remember, we multiply denominator and the whole number, add with the numerator. So 2 times 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. So we have 15/2. So I have 3G equals 2 times 15/2. I can think about putting 2/1. So So 2 times 15 is 30, and then 30 over 2 is 15. So we have 3g equals 15. And then our last step, divide both sides by 3 to solve for g using that inverse operation. So that means that we would need 5 gallons of water for a 7.5-inch fish. So that is using it with our ratios. We can also use our graphs. So we're going to use one of the graphs to estimate each answer. So this one we're just going to give a ballpark. It does not have to be exactly precise, but we're going to talk about how we explain it. So how many gallons would you need for 16 inches of fish? So we are looking for 16 inches of fish. Well, right here I have 15. If I was to go up, 16 would just be one more, and if I looked over, we would have a point probably somewhere right up here if we were to continue that line. So if I look, that would put me somewhere between 10 and 11 gallons. So I'd probably say a good estimate would be about 10.5 gallons. We could check it on the other one as well. So here's the fish inches. 16 would be right about here. If we go all the way up and we continued that line, we could probably say it would be somewhere right about here, which is between 10 and 11 again. So we can interpret it that way. Now, how many inches of fish would fit into 16 gallons? So now we have 16 gallons. So right here on my graph, here's talking about gallons. Here would be 16, and I would be way up here on my graph. So if we were to estimate and continue it on, that one's kind of hard because it goes off the page. However, we can go back to that unit rate. So remember up here that for every 1 gallon, there is 1.5 fish inches. So if we had 16 gallons, we could take 1 times 16 gives us 16. So we can multiply by 1.5. So we can do 16 times 1.5 or 1.5. And so when we do that, we would get about 24 gallons. Oh, sorry, 24 inches because we were given the gallons. So it would be about a 24-inch fish that could fit in that tank. We could do the same thing going the opposite direction as well.